The dinner was still on the stove, untouched. The cartoons were still playing on the TV. And the baby's bottle sat on the coffee table, the milk inside spoiled and sour. Everything in the Ayala home looked normal, except for one thing. The entire family had vanished. Days later, the rivers around Rosefield began giving up their secrets. A mutilated torso, a child's broken body, and a cassette tape with a chilling whisper in the background. This isn't just a missing persons case. This is one of the darkest unsolved mysteries Washington has ever seen, and even after 30 years, the truth has never surfaced. If you're drawn to stories like this, true mysteries that demand answers, make sure to subscribe and join us as we uncover cases the world still can't explain. Now, let's go back to where it all began, the night the Ayala family disappeared. On August 30, 1992, Tomas and Elena Ayala, along with their 2-year-old daughter Isela, disappeared from their modest home in Rosefield, Washington. They were last seen leaving a family barbecue just after dark, smiling, tired, and ready to get the baby to bed. By all accounts, it was just another ordinary Sunday. By morning, the family had vanished without a trace. The Ayalas were not wealthy, not powerful, not people you'd expect to end up in a headline. Tomas was 31, a maintenance worker for the local school district. His job was steady, and though it didn't pay much, he was respected. Reliable. The type of man who showed up early, fixed what was broken, and kept mostly to himself. Elena was 28. Warm, protective, a stay-at-home mother who devoted her days to raising Isela. Her family described her as meticulous. She folded laundry the same day it was washed. She kept handwritten grocery lists, always in neat cursive. She never missed a phone call, and if she did, she called back right away. And then there was Isela. Only 2 years old, she was the center of their lives. A wide-eyed toddler with a head of dark curls and a laugh that carried through the house. Her parents doted on her. She rarely left their sight. The Ayalas had no criminal history, no debts, no history of violence or drugs. By every measure, they were unremarkable. Ordinary. Which made what happened to them all the more haunting. On the evening of August 30th, the family drove out to Elena's sister Maria's house for a backyard barbecue. It was nothing unusual: hamburgers, potato salad, laughter spilling out into the warm summer air. Maria would later recall that Tomas seemed distracted that night. Not upset, not angry, just distant. He ate little, kept glancing at his watch, and excused himself early from conversations. Elena, by contrast, seemed cheerful. She laughed with her sister, helped clear plates, and chased after Isela, who was running barefoot across the yard. At around 8:45 p.m., Elena gathered up the toddler's things. She kissed her sister goodbye and promised to call the next morning, as she always did after visits. Maria waved from the porch as the family pulled away in their silver 1987 Toyota Camry. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. On Monday morning, Tomas failed to show up for work at the school district. His supervisor found it unusual but assumed he was sick. By that afternoon, Maria grew uneasy. She had expected Elena's call, but the phone stayed silent. She dialed repeatedly, but each time the line rang out. By Tuesday morning, she drove to the Ayala's home herself. What she found chilled her. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. The casserole Elena had brought home from Maria's was still on the stove, covered neatly with foil. A bottle of milk sat on the coffee table, spoiled. The television in the living room was still on, playing cartoons. Isela's stuffed rabbit was on the couch. But the family was gone, and so was their car. When Maria called police, officers arrived quickly but left puzzled. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken glass, no blood, no evidence of a struggle, nothing to suggest foul play, and nothing to suggest the family had planned to leave. Their clothes were still in the closets. Elena's purse was by the couch. The baby's stroller was in the corner. But Tomas's wallet was missing, and so were the car keys. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood. Not a single neighbor had seen the family's return that night. No headlights. No arguments. No sound at all. It was as if the family had evaporated into thin air. At first, investigators leaned toward the simplest explanation. The Ayalas had left voluntarily. Maybe they had financial troubles, immigration concerns, or family conflicts that no one knew about. But the more police dug, the less sense that theory made. Tomas's paychecks had been deposited regularly. The family had no significant debt. They had no known enemies, no criminal ties. Their passports were still in the bedroom drawer. Even more, Elena had never gone a day without calling Maria. Not once. The voluntary disappearance theory began to crumble. By the end of the week, the Rosefield Police Department issued a bulletin. Missing, Tomas Ayala, 31. Missing, Elena Ayala, 28. Missing, Isela Ayala, 2. Missing, Isela Ayala, 2. Flyers were distributed to gas stations and grocery stores. Spanish-language newspapers in the region picked up the story, but larger outlets ignored it. 3 people gone from a small town. No evidence. No witnesses. Just an open door and silence. The case gained little traction outside of Rosefield. In a majority-white town, a missing Hispanic family didn't spark headlines. But to Maria it was everything. She knew something had happened. She could feel it. And 2 weeks later, her fears were confirmed. On the morning of September 14, 1992, a fisherman casting his line in the Merritt River, 42 miles from Rosefield, spotted something tangled in the reeds near the shore. At first, he thought it was a mannequin maybe tossed from a truck. It wasn't. It was a human torso. Headless. Armless. Legless. The remains of a young woman. Authorities descended on the scene. The torso was badly decomposed, but there were details investigators couldn't ignore. Red-painted fingernails, a sheer nightgown, a familiar build. An autopsy confirmed what Maria already knew in her heart. The torso belonged to a woman in her late 20s. Roughly 5'3". Around 110 pounds. Brown skin. 2 months pregnant. Maria collapsed when she heard the news. The body matched Elena. What had begun as a missing persons case was now a homicide investigation. But the discovery of Elena's remains didn't answer the most pressing questions. Where was her daughter? Where was her husband? And why had Elena's body been mutilated, scattered like something meant to be hidden, but not well enough? The river had given up one secret. But it wouldn't be the last. Because only 10 days later, another body would surface. Smaller, sadder, and far more disturbing. 10 days after the torso was pulled from the Merritt River, another fisherman cast his line into a different body of water, and found something that would darken the case beyond repair. It was small, fragile, and unmistakably human. On the afternoon of September 24, 1992, a fisherman standing on the banks of the Elwyn River noticed something caught against a log near the water's edge. At first glance, it looked like a doll, bloated and pale. But as he waded closer, his stomach dropped. It wasn't a doll. It was the body of a toddler. The fisherman drove straight to the Kelso police station and reported what he'd seen. Officers responded within minutes, and when they pulled the body from the water, the entire department fell silent. The child was a girl between 18 months and 2 years old. She was wearing a cotton diaper with pink safety pins, a striped shirt and faded pink terry shorts. Her tiny frame was badly decomposed, and her skull bore a deep fracture behind her right ear. The coroner listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. She had been in the water for at least 3 weeks. Her description matched Isela Ayala. The discovery of the toddler just 19 miles from where the torso was found immediately shifted the investigation. 2 bodies. Both Hispanic females. Both found in rivers connected to the Columbia Basin. Both within weeks of each other. Detectives had little doubt. They were related. Possibly mother and daughter. Sergeant Don Harker of Kelso PD told local papers, "It would be very unusual to have 2 victims of violent homicide, both Hispanic, turn up in these waters within such a short period of time, and not have the cases be connected. But if Elena and Isela had been found, where was Tomas?" Divers scoured the Elwyn River for days, searching for clothing, jewelry, or additional remains. Nothing turned up. Sniffer dogs were brought to the banks of both the Elwyn and Merritt rivers. They traced faint scents but could not lead handlers to further evidence. Authorities launched aerial searches with helicopters, scanning the riverbanks for freshly disturbed soil, signs of campsites, or discarded belongings. Again, nothing. The water had washed the trail clean. The toddler's remains were fingerprinted, though no match came back from state or federal databases. In 1992, DNA testing was still primitive, especially for degraded samples. While investigators attempted to extract viable material from both bodies, the results were inconclusive. Both victims remained legally classified as Jane Does. Even though everyone, Maria, the family, the investigators, believed they were Elena and Isela. The lack of official confirmation would cripple the case for years to come. As news of the discovery spread, leads poured in. One name that surfaced early was Gerald Boyd, a drifter and ex-con who had been spotted panhandling near the Merritt River the same week the torso was discovered. Boyd had a violent past, including domestic assault charges and no clear alibi. Police questioned him extensively. He denied knowing the family, denied involvement, and after a search of his vehicle and belongings turned up nothing, he was released. Another lead pointed to a long-haul truck driver who often traveled Interstate 5, the same corridor that ran near every discovery site. The driver, Kent Booker, had been reported acting erratically at a truck stop the night the Ayalas vanished. But before he could be thoroughly investigated, Booker suffered a fatal heart attack. His potential role would never be confirmed. As the weeks turned into months, one theory gained traction: Tomas Ayala himself. He was, after all, missing. He had access to the car. He could have killed Elena and Isela, dismembered the body, scattered the remains, and fled. Investigators considered the possibility that Tomas had snapped under pressure, that something had happened at the barbecue or on the drive home and he had lashed out. But those who knew him insisted otherwise. Maria told police. He wasn't perfect, but he adored his daughter. He wasn't violent. If anything, he was quiet. Too quiet sometimes. But he would never hurt them. Friends described Tomas as a family man. Reserved, yes. Private, yes. But not dangerous. Still, without his body, and without answers, suspicion lingered. Was he a victim? Or the perpetrator? One piece of evidence deepened the mystery. During the initial search of the Ayala home, police had found a grocery list on the counter. At the bottom, scrawled in quick handwriting, was a single word: Hancock. It wasn't a store. It wasn't a neighbor. No one by that name was known to the family. At first, detectives assumed it meant nothing. But when a used bookstore clerk in Oregon later discovered a crumpled receipt from Hancock, California tucked into an old paperback, investigators reconsidered. The receipt was dated August 31, 1992, the morning after the Ayalas were last seen. Had someone driven south with them that night? Was Tomas alive, traveling under the radar? Or had the killer deliberately planted the clue to send police chasing the wrong direction? With no fingerprints and no surveillance, the lead fizzled. Rosefield was small. Fewer than 10,000 residents. The disappearance of the Ayalas, and the grisly discoveries that followed, rattled everyone. Parents began locking their doors at night, something few had bothered to do before. Rumors spread. A killer stalking young families, a drifter targeting immigrants, or worse, that Tomas was alive, hiding in plain sight, watching from the shadows. But as fall turned to winter, the case lost momentum. No further remains were found. No new evidence emerged. And for a while, it seemed the river had swallowed the truth whole. By early 1993, the case officially went cold. Elena and Isela remained buried in unmarked graves, their identities unconfirmed by science, though known in the hearts of those who loved them. Tomas's name lingered on missing persons bulletins, his face growing older only in the imagination of those who wondered where he'd gone. Detectives moved on to other cases. The media stopped calling. But for Maria, the silence was unbearable. She clipped every article, every update, every rumor, and filed them in a box under her bed. She never stopped calling police, never stopped asking for answers. And she never stopped repeating the same words. Somebody knows. Somebody saw something. And one day it's going to come out. 2 bodies had been recovered. Both mutilated. Both hidden in rivers that ran alongside Interstate 5. The evidence was thin. The suspects unproven. And the one person who might have had answers, Tomas, was nowhere to be found. By 1993, Rosefield had returned to uneasy normalcy. The rivers flowed as they always had. Life went on. But the Ayala case was far from over. Because a decade later, when the world had all but forgotten, the mystery would resurface. And it would bring with it a clue so strange, so haunting, that even the most seasoned investigators struggled to make sense of it. 2 bodies, 2 rivers, and 1 man missing. But as investigators tried to assemble the puzzle, the pieces refused to fit. Every lead unraveled. Every theory opened a new door, only to close again in silence. The science of 1992 was not the science of today. DNA was in its infancy, accessible only to a handful of labs in the country. Even when available, the results were often slow, inconclusive, and easily degraded by water or time. Elena's remains had been too badly damaged to yield a clean profile. Isela's body was worse. Weeks in the water had stripped her skin and broken down her tissue, leaving little for examiners to work with. Fingerprints produced nothing. Dental records were unavailable. The investigators had bodies but no confirmation. In the official files they remained Jane Does. Unofficially, everyone, Maria, the detectives, even the coroner, knew the truth. But without confirmation the case stumbled. It meant law enforcement couldn't tie the remains directly to the missing persons file of the Ayala family. It meant they couldn't pursue charges or issue warrants. It meant they were trapped in limbo. With Elena and Isela presumed dead, suspicion naturally fell on the one person still unaccounted for, Tomas Ayala. He was missing but not confirmed dead. He had opportunity. He had access to the car. And statistically, the husband was often the culprit in domestic homicides. Detectives began building a profile. They spoke to Tomas's co-workers, neighbors, and friends. What they found was contradictory. At work, Tomas was described as reliable if quiet. He wasn't social, but he never caused problems. His supervisor called him dependable. But some neighbors painted a different picture. They recalled arguments between Tomas and Elena, shouting late into the night. They described him as moody, withdrawn, and sometimes angry. No one reported violence. No police reports were ever filed. But in the absence of evidence pointing elsewhere, suspicion hardened. Investigators theorized that Tomas had killed his wife and daughter, dismembered Elena's body to prevent identification, and scattered the remains across different rivers before fleeing. It was plausible. But if it were true, why hadn't he surfaced? Why no new bank activity, no border crossings, no sightings? Had he fled under a new identity? Or had he ended up dead himself? Not everyone believed Tomas was guilty. Some detectives pushed a different theory, that the family had been the victims of opportunity. The Merritt and Elwyn rivers were both situated close to Interstate 5, a major highway that spanned from Mexico to Canada. Long-haul truck drivers, transients, and drifters traveled that road daily, stopping in small towns like Rosefield along the way. What if the Ayalas had encountered the wrong person at the wrong time? Perhaps they had stopped for gas or pulled over at a rest stop on the drive home from Maria's house. Perhaps a stranger had offered help, and then turned violent. This theory explained why Tomas was missing too. He may have been killed alongside his wife and child, his body dumped somewhere else, never to be recovered. But without evidence, it was speculation. The word scrawled on Elena's grocery list, Hancock, haunted investigators. Months after the initial search, when the bookstore clerk discovered the receipt from Hancock, California, hope flared. It was dated the very morning after the family vanished. Had Tomas bought gas there? Had the killer used their car to travel south? Detectives dispatched calls to gas stations in the tiny town of Hancock. No one remembered anything. No surveillance cameras existed in that rural area in 1992. The receipt was bagged, tagged, and filed. Another clue that led nowhere. As the case dragged on, the vacuum left by official silence was filled with whispers. Some residents believed Tomas had been involved in something larger. Drugs, debt, maybe a smuggling ring. Though there was no evidence, rumors flourished. Others thought the Ayalas had been targeted for being Hispanic in a mostly white town. A hate crime. A brutal warning meant to silence or intimidate. Still others pointed to the strange detail of Elena being pregnant. Could the father have been someone other than Tomas? Had jealousy sparked violence? Every theory found believers. None produced answers. One detail troubled investigators most: the dismemberment. Why cut Elena's body apart? Why remove the head and limbs but leave the torso intact? Some argued it was to prevent identification. Though if that were true, why leave her fingernails painted red, her clothing intact, her jewelry visible? Others suggested it was an attempt to obscure the cause of death. Without the head, it was impossible to determine strangulation, blunt trauma, or a gunshot. Or maybe it was meant to send a message. A signature. So, the message was chilling. By the end of 1992, pressure mounted. The community wanted answers. Maria demanded justice. Detectives wanted closure. But the evidence wasn't there. No car. No murder weapon. No confirmed identities. No financial trail. Every interview, every lead, every tip ended in silence. The case teetered between two competing narratives. Tomas as the killer, alive somewhere hiding. Or Tomas as a victim, murdered and buried where no one would ever find him. The truth was lost in the water, in the gaps of forensic science, in the cracks of memory. By 1993, the case slipped quietly into cold status. The flyers yellowed on bulletin boards. The newspaper articles stopped. The rivers returned to their usual rhythm, carrying logs and fish downstream, leaving the horror they once revealed forgotten by most. But not by Maria. She refused to give up. She refused to let her sister and niece be erased. She called detectives weekly. She sent letters to officials. She begged for the bodies to be tested again, for the car to be found, for someone to take the case seriously. Her persistence earned her a reputation, not all of it kind. Some called her obsessive. Others pitied her. But Maria didn't care. because she believed someone knew. For the next decade, the Ayala case remained an open wound. 2 bodies recovered. 1 man missing. No answers. Detectives retired. Files gathered dust. But Maria kept her box of clippings, her stack of photocopied reports, her notes scribbled on napkins and envelopes. She never stopped asking questions. And then, in 2003, something happened. A discovery was made that pulled the case back into the light. Not another body, but something almost as haunting. By 1993, the case was already slipping away. Leads dried up. Evidence grew cold. And the voices demanding answers grew quieter, one by one, until only Maria's was left. When the Ayalas first vanished, Rosefield was shaken. For a few weeks, it was all anyone could talk about. Coffee shop conversations revolved around suspects. Parents clutched their children tighter. But time has a way of dulling even the sharpest fear. As winter arrived, people returned to their routines. The gossip slowed. The case became a cautionary tale, mentioned in whispers, then only in passing. The rivers kept flowing. The town kept moving. But for those closest to the Ayalas, time stood still. Maria Ramirez refused to let the case fade. Every morning she opened her box of clippings. Newspaper headlines. Flyers. Notes scribbled in her own hand. She reread them until the paper frayed. Every week she called the police. Most weeks no one answered. When they did, they offered the same words, no updates. She wrote letters to the governor, to the FBI, to the attorney general. Most were ignored. A few were returned with polite dismissals. She began attending town council meetings, standing during the public comment period and reminding anyone who would listen. A family didn't just vanish. They were murdered. And no one is doing anything about it. Some applauded her persistence. Others rolled their eyes. But Maria didn't care. Because she knew her sister. And she knew this wasn't just another missing persons case. Part of the problem was the timing. In 1992, missing person cases involving minorities rarely got media traction in small towns. The Ayalas were not well connected, not wealthy, and not white. The disappearance of a Hispanic family in Rosefield didn't make the evening news outside the county. The other problem was money. Testing degraded DNA was expensive. Local police lacked the funding and state labs had long backlogs. Requests for advanced testing were often delayed or denied. Elena and Isela's remains sat in storage, unexamined for years. It wasn't negligence from any one detective. It was the weight of a system built to move on quickly. And that's exactly what happened. In 1994, nearly 2 years after the disappearance, a trucker claimed to have picked up a Hispanic man matching Tomas's description at a rest stop in Northern California. Detectives drove out, interviewed the trucker, and canvassed nearby towns. No trace was found. The lead went cold. In 1996, hunters stumbled on clothing in the woods near the Merritt River, a pair of children's overalls and a woman's blouse. Forensic testing showed no DNA. The items weren't linked to the Ayalas. In 1999, a caller phoned Rosefield PD claiming Elena was alive and living under a new name in Nevada. The tip was investigated. It was false. Every lead was the same. Hopes raised, then crushed. Detective Wayne Kellner, who had worked the case from the beginning, retired in 1997. In his exit interview, he admitted the Ayala file was the one that haunted him most. It was like chasing shadows, he said. We had bodies, we had a missing car, we had a word scribbled on a grocery list. But every time we thought we had something, it fell apart. It was like the case didn't want to be solved. The younger detectives inherited the file, but with other cases stacking up, the Ayala mystery was pushed to the bottom of the pile. By the early 2000s, it was officially considered a cold case. For Maria, Life became divided into two timelines, before her sister vanished and after. Before, she was lively, social, quick to laugh. After, she carried herself differently. She spoke softly, like someone always on the edge of breaking. She didn't celebrate holidays. Birthdays passed unmarked. She rarely spoke about Elena in the present tense. But she never stopped asking questions. She plastered flyers in neighboring towns long after others thought it pointless. She contacted private investigators, though she couldn't afford to hire them. She clipped every article that mentioned the words "unidentified remains." Maria was living in limbo, a place where grief never ended because closure never came. By 2002, 10 years had passed since the Ayalas vanished. Rosefield had grown. New families moved into the neighborhood. Children who had once whispered about the case were now adults, raising children of their own. The Ayala house had long been sold. A new family lived there, unaware that the living room once held a half-empty baby bottle and an untouched dinner. For most, the case had become a distant memory. But Maria couldn't forget. And then, in 2003, something unexpected happened. A land survey crew working near an abandoned property 60 miles south of Rosefield stumbled across the rusted shell of a car, buried under moss and leaves. The VIN confirmed what Maria had prayed for and feared in equal measure. It was the Ayala's missing Toyota Camry. Inside, investigators found little. The interior had rotted. The seats were gone. Rainwater had eaten away the fabric. But in the glove box they discovered a single item, a blue cassette tape unlabeled. It had degraded badly, but technicians managed to salvage fragments of audio. A child's laugh. A woman's voice, soft and calm, saying, "Say hi to Daddy, I say." Then static. The tape reignited hope and horror. If it was recorded the night of the disappearance, it suggested Tomas had been present. But was he holding the camera? Was he the one being addressed? Or was he already gone? The tape didn't answer questions. It only raised more. And without further evidence, it couldn't move the case forward. The Camry was towed, tested, and eventually stored. The tape was archived. And once again the case slipped back into silence. For Maria it was the cruelest pattern. Every lead dangled hope, then crumbled. Every discovery promised answers, but delivered only more questions. By the time the 20th anniversary arrived in 2012, the Ayala case was no closer to resolution. Elena and Isela's graves remained unmarked. Tomas remained missing. And Maria remained waiting. What happens to a town when a family disappears? At first, fear spreads like wildfire. Then suspicion. Then silence. And eventually nothing. That was the cycle of Rosefield. The Ayalas became a ghost story. A lesson whispered to children. Lock your doors, don't trust strangers, be careful driving home at night. But to Maria it was never a story. It was real. And she wasn't ready to give up. Because deep down she believed the case wasn't over. She believed something, or someone, would resurface. And in time she would be proven right. Cases don't solve themselves. They sit in boxes, gathering dust, waiting for someone new to care enough to open them. In 2015, that someone was Detective Mallory Keene. By 2015, the Ayala case was more than 2 decades old. The original investigators had retired. The box containing the family's file sat in the back of a metal cabinet in the Rosefield Police Department, its edges frayed, its contents yellowed with age. Detective Mallory Keene was only 8 years old when the Ayalas disappeared. She remembered the whispers, the flyers, the fear that hung over Rosefield. For her, reopening the case wasn't just work, it was personal. Keene had built a reputation for persistence. She wasn't easily discouraged, and when she asked to review old cold cases, the Ayala file was the first she pulled. Inside were the familiar details. A missing family. 2 bodies pulled from rivers. A missing car later recovered. A cassette tape with faint voices. And endless notes that ended in the same word, scrawled again and again, unresolved. Keene knew that technology had changed since 1992. What had been impossible back then was now routine. DNA that once seemed degraded beyond use could now yield results with modern testing. She filed requests to have Elena and Isalla's remains re-examined. This time, the labs returned something investigators had waited decades to hear: a viable DNA profile. The samples were compared against Maria Ramirez, now in her 50s. The results were conclusive. The remains were Elena and Isella Ayala. The confirmation didn't solve the case, but it gave them back their names. And for Maria, it was the first piece of truth she had held in more than 20 years. Keene also revisited the cassette tape. Audio experts cleaned and enhanced the degraded recording. The child's laugh was clearer now, unmistakably a toddler's. The woman's voice, too, sharpened. "Say hi to Daddy, I say." But on the tape something new emerged. In the background, faint but chilling, was another voice. Mel. A few words only. But enough. It said, "Hurry up." Who was the man's voice? If it was Tomas, why the urgency? And why had his wife been telling their daughter to say hi, as if he were behind the camera or perhaps across the room? If it wasn't Tomas, then who was it? And what had happened after the tape cut to static? The answers were as elusive as ever. Keene dug deeper into the mysterious Hancock note. The grocery list with that word scrawled at the bottom had long been dismissed as meaningless. But Keene tracked the old receipt again, the one from Hancock, California, dated the morning after the disappearance. In 2016, she drove down to Hancock herself. The gas station where the receipt had originated was gone, replaced by a strip mall. But a retired attendant who had worked there in the early 90s still lived in town. When shown a photo of Tomas Ayala, the man paused. He couldn't be certain after more than 2 decades. But he thought he remembered a Hispanic man coming through around that time, tired, nervous, traveling with a child. A child wearing pink. The tip electrified the investigation. Could Tomas have fled south with Isella, only to meet tragedy along the way? But the dates didn't align. Isella's body had been in the water too long by the time it was discovered. She had been killed weeks before that sighting. The timeline made it impossible. The attendant's memory, though sincere, was unreliable. A face seen once in 1992 could not stand as evidence in 2016. Another lead, another dead end. Keene expanded her search, comparing the Ayala case to other unsolved murders along the I-5 corridor. What she found was unsettling. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, multiple women had been discovered in rivers, wooded areas, and abandoned lots across Oregon and Washington. Many were unidentified. Many had been dismembered or mutilated. None had ever been connected to the Ayalas. But the similarities were undeniable. Was the Ayala case part of something larger? A serial offender moving along the interstate, striking at random, leaving bodies in waterways? Or was the overlap coincidence? Crimes of opportunity that happened to echo each other? With every new piece of evidence, the central question remained: what happened to Tomas? Was he the killer, orchestrating the murders and vanishing into obscurity? Or was he killed alongside his wife and daughter, his body hidden where it would never be found? Keene reviewed old witness statements. She noted again and again Maria's insistence that Tomas was no killer. But she also noted how quiet, withdrawn, and distant he had seemed in the weeks before the disappearance. How he had checked his watch that night at the barbecue. If he was innocent, he was a ghost. If he was guilty, he was a ghost. Either way, the absence defined the case. By now, Maria was older but no less determined. She sat with Keene for hours, retelling every memory, every detail. She handed over her box of clippings, her decades of obsession. When asked what she believed happened, Maria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't think Tomas killed them. But I think he knew something. Something he couldn't say. And that's why he's gone too." By 2018, Keene had exhausted every lead she could. The case was profiled in a regional newspaper, sparking brief public interest. But again, no new witnesses came forward. No one confessed. The file remained open but unsolved. For Keene, the most chilling part of the case wasn't what they knew. It was what they didn't. The mutilation. The missing head. The word Hancock. The faint male voice on the tape. Pieces of a puzzle that had no edges, no center, no picture to guide them. A puzzle that had haunted Rosefield for more than 2 decades. By the mid-2010s, the Ayala case had stretched across generations of investigators. It had consumed Maria's life. It had cast a shadow over Rosefield. But still no answers. What had started as a quiet Sunday dinner ended as one of the most haunting mysteries in Washington state. And though the case was colder than ever, the questions it raised burned hotter than ever. Who killed Elena and Isela? Where was Tomas? And why had the river revealed just enough to torment, but never enough to tell the truth? The case never found resolution. But its story remained a mirror, reflecting not just the brutality of crime, but the fragility of justice, the flaws of investigation, and the persistence of memory. And that persistence would not fade. Because Maria still lit a candle every year. And because Detective Keene still opened the file, even when she knew it might never close. Some mysteries end with a name. Others end with a conviction, a sentence, a file stamped closed. But the disappearance of the Ayala family never ended. It lingers, in rivers, in rumors, in silence. And in the faces of those who still remember. When a case sits unresolved for decades, theories take on a life of their own. The Ayala disappearance is no exception. Over time, 3 theories have become the pillars on which the mystery rests. The most straightforward theory remains the one police first considered, that Tomas killed his wife and daughter, scattered their bodies, and vanished. It fits some of the facts. He had access to the car. He was last seen with them. And he has never been found. Supporters of this theory point to his withdrawn behavior in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. The way he checked his watch at the barbecue. His silence that night. But there are problems. If he killed them, why leave Elena pregnant? Why mutilate her body in such a way? Why kill his daughter, whom everyone agreed he adored? And perhaps most telling, if Tomas was the killer, why has no trace of him ever surfaced? Not a single bank withdrawal, phone record, or confirmed sighting in more than 30 years. If Tomas killed his family, he did the impossible. He erased himself completely. Another theory suggests the family crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong time. Perhaps they stopped for gas or pulled over at a rest stop. Perhaps a stranger offered help, then turned violent. This would explain the mutilation, the dismemberment, the scattering of remains. It would explain why Tomas is missing, because he was a victim too. His body could lie buried, burned, or washed away, his story silenced along with his wife and daughters. But this theory relies heavily on chance. What are the odds that an entire family in a small town vanished at random? And if it was random, why the word Hancock? Why the tape? Why the carefully chosen rivers? Too many details resist randomness. The third theory is more elusive. Some believe Tomas knew something, a secret he couldn't share, a connection he couldn't reveal. Perhaps he owed someone money. Perhaps he had been involved in something he never told Elena about. Perhaps the family wasn't targeted at random at all. If true, Tomas may have been forced to cooperate, his silence bought with fear. Or he may have been killed for what he knew. This theory is impossible to prove. But for Maria, it feels closest to the truth. He wasn't a killer, she said. But he wasn't innocent either. He knew something. And whatever it was, it died with him. Regardless of theory, one truth remains. The system failed the Ayalas. In 1992, DNA testing could have confirmed identities. It didn't. Cross-jurisdiction cooperation could have pursued interstate leads. It didn't. Media coverage could have amplified the search. It didn't. The Ayalas were lost not only to violence but to indifference. And that indifference allowed the case to fade into the shadows for years at a time. For Maria, the cost was everything. She lost her sister, her niece, and her brother-in-law. She lost decades of peace, carrying grief that never ended. She spent birthdays alone, lit candles on anniversaries no one else remembered, and begged for updates that rarely came. Her persistence kept the case alive. But it also consumed her life. And for Rosefield, the cost was quieter. A lingering shadow. A story parents told their children as a warning: don't trust strangers. Don't go out alone. Don't think you're safe just because you live in a small town. The town moved on. But the fear never truly left. When people speak of the Ayala case, certain images always return. The untouched dinner on the stove. The baby bottle soured with milk. The stuffed rabbit left on the couch. The torso in the river. The tiny body caught against a log. And the cassette tape filled with static, laughter, and one chilling word whispered in the background: hurry up. These fragments are all that remain of a family that once lived, laughed, and loved in a small Washington town. More than 30 years later, the case remains unsolved. No arrests have been made. No new evidence has surfaced. The Rivers gave up pieces of the truth. But not enough. Never enough. Detective Keene still reopens the file. Maria still lights candles. And the town of Rosefield still remembers, though most wish they didn't. Because the story of the Ayala family is not just about murder. It is about the way the world can forget you, even when you are screaming to be remembered. In the end, the Ayala case is not about evidence. Not about theories. Not even about guilt or innocence. It is about absence. A mother gone. A child gone. A father gone. And the silence that follows when no one can explain why. The Rivers didn't keep their secrets. They gave us just enough to haunt us. Just enough to remind us that evil doesn't always leave fingerprints. And sometimes the only thing we inherit from tragedy is questions. So what happened to the Ayala family? Was Tomas a killer or another victim? Was this random violence or something more deliberate? Did someone in Rosefield know the truth all along? We may never know. But one thing is certain. The Ayala family vanished on an ordinary Sunday night. And decades later, their story remains one of the darkest mysteries in Washington's history. What do you think happened that night?